Grant makes $118,000 a year. His coworkers think he's doing great. His neighbor thinks he's doing great. His own father, when he hears the number, goes quiet for a second and says, "Well, you've made it." Grant's savings account has $1,100 in it. Not because he blew it on anything anyone could point to. No boat, no gambling problem, no secret spending anyone could catch him at. Just 8 years of a salary that kept climbing, while something else climbed right alongside it. His rent, his car payment, his idea of what a normal life should look like at this income. Quietly, at almost exactly the same speed, without ever once looking like a decision. If numbers like that make you a little uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is worth more than a video that just tells you what you want to hear. This channel runs on the math, not the vibes. So if that's your kind of thing, stick around. There's a new one of these every week, and none of them are trying to sell you a course. You probably think Grant just needs to earn a little more, and eventually this sorts itself out. It doesn't work that way. 4 ordinary decisions did this to him, spread out over 8 years. Each one completely defensible on its own. Here they are. Mistake 1. The upgrade that arrives right on schedule with the raise. Grant used to rent a 1-bedroom for $1,500 a month. 2 raises later, he and his wife bought a house. Payment, taxes, and insurance together landed close to $3,000 a month. On paper, that's just what people do. You make more, you live a little bigger. Nobody sits down and calculates what the old number was worth. They just watch it disappear into the new one. Here's the asterisk. That $1,500 gap, invested instead of spent, at a historical long-term average of 8%, an assumption, not a promise, for the same 20 years, comes out to roughly $820,000. Not imaginary money, money that existed, briefly, in the space between his old rent and his new mortgage, and then quietly got absorbed into square footage he mostly uses on weekends. Add in property tax, maintenance, and the new furniture that somehow always follows a bigger house, and the real gap between what he was spending before and what he spends now is even wider than the mortgage payment alone suggests. I'll flag the other side of this fairly, because leaving it out would be dishonest. A house isn't only a cost. Once rent climbs toward roughly 5% of what an equivalent house would cost each year, buying stops being the expensive choice and starts being the rational one. The math genuinely flips at that point. And if you're staring down a landlord who raises rent every single year while your neighbor's mortgages stay locked in place, that threshold might already be behind you. Grant's rent was well under that line. He didn't upgrade because the math demanded it. He upgraded because the raise arrived and the bigger house was sitting there, available, and it felt like the natural next step. Picture the walkthrough. Bigger kitchen, a yard, a garage instead of street parking. Every reason to say yes was a real, physical, defensible reason. None of them were the number that actually mattered. The mortgage broker never once mentioned $820,000 because that number was never the topic of the conversation. The topic was always the monthly payment, and the monthly payment, on its own, always looks fine. Mistake 2. The car bought on the monthly payment instead of the total cost. Grant financed a $40,000 truck at 7% interest over 72 months. The payment fit his budget comfortably. That was, in his mind, the entire decision. Between interest and depreciation, the real cost of that truck runs past $50,000, most of it invisible on the day he signed. He'll trade it in around year 6, roll whatever's left owed into the next loan, and start the same 6-year clock over again. which is how a lot of households end up making a car payment for the rest of their working life without ever noticing the pattern. Put the other version next to it. A $22,000 vehicle paid down faster, with the $18,000 difference invested instead. 10 years at a long-term average of 8% turns that $18,000 into roughly $39,000, sitting quietly in the background of a life that never noticed it was missing. Not a disaster, either choice. People need vehicles. But the payment fits answers a completely different question than what does this actually cost me? And there's a second cost that never shows up on the sticker. A large auto payment on Grant's credit file was part of why the mortgage rate he later qualified for came in slightly worse than it could have. One ordinary decision, quietly taxing the next one before he'd even made it. Nobody at the dealership mentioned that either, because nobody at the dealership benefits from you knowing it. The finance office makes money on the loan, not on the 20 years after it. Mistake 3 doesn't look like a mistake at all. It looks like caution. Grant kept just over $100,000 sitting in a savings account, paying next to nothing, waiting for the market to drop, waiting for the right time, waiting for a signal that never quite arrives in a form you can act on. It felt responsible. It felt like the cautious move, the one a careful person makes while everyone else is out there taking risks. Here's the number that account was quietly losing the whole time. At an inflation rate of around 3.5%, $100,000 loses about $3,500 a year in real purchasing power, just sitting there. 3 years of waiting, and that pile buys about $10,000 less than it did when Grant first parked it, even though the balance on the screen never dropped a single dollar. And the crash he was waiting for? It never showed up on his schedule. Markets don't check anyone's calendar before they move. That's the part that should land. The number on the statement stayed the same. The world underneath it didn't. Money sitting still isn't neutral. It's losing, slowly enough that nobody ever feels the exact moment it happens, which is exactly why the habit survives as long as it does. So why does it feel safer than it is? Because losing money to a market drop feels like a decision. Losing money to inflation feels like nothing at all, which is exactly the problem. Mistake 4 is the one that sounds the most responsible, which is exactly why it's the easiest one to miss. Grant put extra money every month toward paying down his mortgage faster, a loan sitting at a guaranteed rate of 4%. Meanwhile, his employer offered a match on retirement contributions he wasn't fully claiming, and the rest of his available cash could have gone into a tax-advantaged account instead. Run the two side by side. Paying down that 4% loan early guarantees you save 4%, and only 4%. Contributing to the retirement account instead at a historical long-term average of 8%. Again, an assumption, not a promise. Plus the employer match he was leaving on the table every month, plus the tax treatment those accounts get, adds up to a meaningfully wider gap than 4 points on paper. It doesn't feel that way in the moment, because a mortgage payoff has a finish line you can picture, and a retirement account doesn't. That's a psychological cost, not a mathematical one, and it's a real reason people choose it anyway. But over 10 years, the difference between the two paths comes out well into 6 figures. None of this shows up in the monthly numbers Grant checks. It shows up on the 20-year one, all at once, the way it always does. Notice something across all 4 of these. The rate you borrow at and the rate you can reasonably expect to earn are 2 completely different numbers, and most people quietly treat them as if they're the same thing. A 4% mortgage and a 7% auto loan are guarantees. You know exactly what they cost. An 8% long-term market average is not a guarantee. It's a historical assumption, and some years it comes in well above that, some years well below. The gap between borrowing and investing is where almost all of this math actually lives. 4 decisions. Not 4 years of reckless spending that would make an interesting story. Just 4 choices, spaced years apart, each one made by a version of Grant who genuinely believed he was doing fine. That's what makes this worth paying attention to. If this only happened to careless people, it wouldn't be worth 40 minutes of your evening. So go back to the start of this video. Grant makes $118,000 a year and has $1,100 saved. Now you know why. 4 decisions, each one defensible on its own, all quietly pointing the same direction for almost a decade. But here's the open loop worth sitting with before you write this off as just Grant's story. Everything you just heard runs on one income, from one kind of job, in one kind of household. Run the same 4 habits through a 2-income household or a commission-based income that swings wildly year to year, and the shape of the damage changes completely. Sometimes worse, sometimes almost invisible until much later, because 2 incomes can hide a gap that 1 income would have exposed years earlier. That's not tonight's video. That's the next one. For now, the 4 causes stay exactly 4. The upgrade timed to the raise, the payment that ignores the total cost, the cash sitting idle out of caution, and the responsible-sounding debt payoff that quietly outbids itself. You don't need Grant's income for this to apply to you. Take Dana, who makes around $55,000 a year. Her version of the gap isn't $1,500 a month. It's closer to $200, a slightly nicer apartment than she needs, a subscription list she's stopped noticing, a few small upgrades that arrived the same year her pay did. Same formula, same 20 years, same 8% long-term assumption. That $200 becomes roughly $110,000, sitting quietly in the background of a life that never felt like it had room to save anything at all. Same money, opposite outcomes. Neither Grant nor Dana would call themselves bad with money. Neither one has a story worth telling at a dinner party. That's exactly why this works on almost everyone watching. There's no obvious villain in it, just a series of ordinary yeses. This is arithmetic, not advice. Your tax situation, your employer match, your interest rate, those are yours, and they change the exact number. What doesn't change is the shape. The gap between what you used to spend and what you spend now is either working for you or it's gone. And there's rarely a third option in between. Nobody sends you a statement showing what the gap could have become. You only ever see what it did become, which is usually nothing. If you've made one of these 4 moves, you're not behind some invisible curve everyone else is ahead of. Most people you know have made at least one of them too. The question that actually matters isn't which mistake. It's what a second income, or a swinging one, does to all 4 of them at once. None of these 4 decisions required a bad month, a crisis, or a moment anyone would point to later and call the turning point. That's what makes the pattern so easy to repeat and so hard to catch in real time. It never announces itself. It just quietly compounds in the background, while the monthly numbers keep looking fine. Grant will probably never sit down and add up the $820,000, the $40,000, the $10,000, and the 6 figures on the other side of that mortgage decision. Most people don't. The number just sits there, unclaimed, doing nothing, waiting for nobody in particular.